Hello, everybody. This is the second Ice Bath podcast, and I am chatting to Wendy Bruchal today, who lives on the Isle of Man, has got bags of experience in the financial crime arena, and we're going to talk about that and Moneyval and what that means, what it is, etc. So, Wendy, hello.
Good morning, Colin. How are you? Happy
I'm good, thank
Friday.
you. Yeah, happy Friday. Yeah, yeah, we're ready for the weekend, aren't we?
Blowing up a hoolie here.
Yeah, yeah. So you are on the Isle of Man, an offshore jurisdiction.
I am.
But you've got background in sort of financial arena. Do you want to just talk about that for a minute? Tell the listeners what that's all about.
Yeah, I'm sort of a serial banker. I started out when I was in university, actually. I walked past a little advert in a window wanting an admin for an office, and I thought I needed part-time. I could walk to it. So I wound up working for a finance company. And once I finished uni, they offered me a job there. So within about 3 years, I learned all about finance, how the business ran, risk ratings, and all sorts of things in lending field. So from there, I wound up in a chartered bank and as a lender originally. Then I specialized in mortgages, which led me to a rather large branch where I started looking at some trends, and I thought, this doesn't feel right. It doesn't smell right. And I think at the end of it, wound up with 113 bad accounts.
Wow.
We had a manager that was into some political arenas and he was well in over his depth. He
Mm,
had a substance abuse problem. So he was basically selling investment certificates for real estate developments that were going to be supported by the provincial government. So they were sort of involved in it as well.
yeah.
And so we had cashiers and waitresses at the local restaurants with at that time was £100,000 worth of debt, and they were making maybe minimum wage if lucky, and
Mm,
living off of tips.
yeah.
So it wasn't good, and I learned all sorts of things about tracing and looking at how this all worked. Issuing things like Mariva injunctions, Anton pillar orders, and getting the money back from offshore jurisdictions. So from that, I just went into larger companies, and at one point, Macquarie Bank purchased an entity that I was in, and because it had a lot of experience, I was the QA manager, the fraud manager. I ran the collections team. I was also risk and compliance manager for North America, and also money laundering came into it. So I
Wow.
sort of used everything,
Yeah.
and then went to work at Equifax,
Yeah.
uh, doing fraud mitigation strategies, and was seconded to a credit card company, which was a real eye-opener because I couldn't figure out why a company based in Toronto and a customer based in Toronto was using an IP address in Nigeria to submit credit applications
Yeah. Yeah.
and things like that. I mean, they had a Salesforce, quasi Salesforce, that would go to department stores and try and have people sign up for the credit card that that department store was issuing. Unfortunately, they got a little greedy. They got paid for every single application they submitted. So in between the real applications, they were very creative with creating people.
Right.
And so that led to other things where you'd get a bunch of cards going to a single address, would pick up those cards. They would use those cards.
Yeah.
Sometimes they'd bust them out.
Yeah.
Other times they would run them and pay them and then apply for credit with a different institution because, of course, now you've got a synthetic person that's got a profile,
Of course. Yeah.
credit profile.
Yeah.
So, I mean, these things then lead to loan applications for cars, mortgages, and
Yeah.
it just goes crazy.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been an interesting journey. The one bank with all the mortgages, I also got involved in marijuana grow operations and meth labs.
Wow. Oh dear.
Had to work with local policing, RCMP, fire officials, and
Yeah.
we actually took bulldozers too because you couldn't repair them.
Yeah.
The meth labs are especially bad in that area because the fumes actually will eat out the foundation.
Yeah, yeah. Anybody who's watched Bad will understand that, won't they?
Yep. So then I decided I needed a break from all that. So
Yeah,
family in the UK, and I thought, okay, come to the Isle of Man. I was working on digital signatures, like e-signatures.
yeah,
At that point in time, this is going back 12 years, there was a very robust lead for digital strategies on the island, and thought, okay, talk to the government, and so here I am.
yeah, yeah. So you started life in Canada.
I
Uh,
did.
yeah, and you've been on the Isle of Man now, did you say 12 years ago? 12
Yeah, it
years?
started 12 years ago. I officially moved 10 years ago,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it's,
So
it's been
what are
interesting.
the characteristics of the Isle of Man's financial sector? Are they different from North America, Canada, do you think?
They are quite different. When I first arrived, I looked at opening a bank account,
Hmm.
which, of course, in North America, you walk into a bank, they open your bank account, you have your ID with you, obviously, and you're limited to the transactions you can do until they actually vet things.
Hmm.
Here, it's sort of if you can get an appointment to open a bank account,
Yeah. Yeah.
then they take all your information, and sometimes they do something with it, and other times they just kind of ignore it for a while.
Hmm.
And it's a very different environment when you talk to people in the banks that looking at risk assessments, and um, privacy is a bit different the way it's managed, and
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it's been different.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, I lived on the Isle of Man for 8 years and trained and conducted investigations over there as well. So I learned a lot about the Isle of Man. And what I found is very aware of risk uh, most of the time. And I've been in the UK now, back in the UK for a couple of years, and the difference is quite stark. I can't tie everybody with the same brush, but I don't think people quite get the need to risk assess here properly yet. Whereas,
Yeah,
yeah, I think the Isle of Man had gone through the mill and understand it. But yeah, and on that note, we both know that in October the Moneyval inspection is coming to town on the Isle of Man. So I thought
indeed.
it'd be useful for listeners to understand a bit more about that. And you're there. I think you've experienced it before. So do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, for want of a better term, Moneyval is just like a giant audit team.
Hmm.
It's composed of what, 35 countries, I think.
Yeah.
And there's many different jurisdictions that they work through. There's specialists in all sorts of facets of what needs to be done. It's basically facing prevention of crime, money laundering, financial crime. And if you do a good job on your Moneyval audit,
Yeah.
then your economy is stable. You've got preventive measures. If you don't do such a good job, then measures are put in place that to guard against financial crime.
Mhm.
If you do a really bad job, you can go on a sanctions list, which of course would be devastating to any economy.
Yeah.
And it's always a moving target, because as crime evolves, of course, your processes, your procedures, your risk assessments all have to change.
Yeah.
So it's really quite dynamic. It's an extremely valuable thing to happen.
Hmm.
But of course, it means everybody now is running through the woods, and, making sure that they've got all their processes in place, that, no stone is left unturned.
Hmm.
Uh, it's great to see that there's huge amounts of collaboration between, individual banks, individual sections of the government,
Yeah.
and, parts of businesses that ordinarily might not feel that they're going to be under the scrutiny
Hmm.
are now sort of looking at, are we involved in this?
Yeah.
Because I mean, it's not just banks and financial institutions anymore. It's CSPs, it's insurance companies,
Yeah.
uh, NOPs. So it's going to be different. I've sat in on a couple of committee meetings, and I've also had the benefit of a presentation from our new police commissioner. He's not that new anymore.
Hmm. Yeah.
I think he's 2.5 years into the job
Okay.
at this point. but he has a very vast background in the UK,
Mhm.
mostly in the area where you are,
Yeah,
with gangs and crime and financial crime and
yeah,
things like that. So he's extremely aware. So he's able to bring a wider lens to part of the equation.
yeah.
And so the FSA has been very supportive of having certain groups get together where they're all sort of exchanging ideas in a platform where they can exchange them without, tromping on anybody's privacy issues or concerns or, giving out company secrets.
Mm,
So just basically looking through one by one, where the risks might be and what the mitigation strategies might be, what they perceive that, Moneyval may look at a certain thing. So I think all in all, I get the general feeling that people think it's going to be, you know, um, how shall I put it, a very thorough review,
yeah,
which of course is needed. You don't want them not to uncover things, but also it's going to make a lot more work for people, which
yeah,
at the end of the day, you know, um, I look at things that you have to keep evolving
yeah.
and you have to understand what's happening in the marketplace. That's not always easy for everybody. We do get the sanctions reports. As I say, FSA has been pretty good at, you know, providing updates. We get updates as well from Moneyval. But I
Mhm.
think for a few people, it's going to be kind of, a watershed moment.
Quite possibly, yeah. I think the thing, my perception around the Isle of Man is, and from everything I've read and experienced there, is that the Isle of Man is relatively safe and relatively crime free. And I think it's just recognised that we all know that criminals, one of the main things they commit crime for is financial reasons. And
Yeah,
I think the worry is that criminal money could be moving through certain institutions. And I think that's probably the biggest concern, isn't it? Um, so it, and just like any other country or jurisdiction, really. Um, so that I suppose is going to be the thrust of it in terms of the sort of crime side of it.
yeah, yeah. And there's also been some recent cases where, we've had some large gaming
Yeah,
companies
yeah,
come under the scrutiny and lose their licenses.
yeah,
So that's sort of a testament that things are working.
yeah, yeah,
That I'm not sure things like that would have been caught a few years ago. I think there's more awareness
yeah. I think you're right.
as we've moved through some of the issues that Moneyval raised the last time,
Mm,
and certainly the new risk assessments that people are looking at.
yeah,
Um, I think we're catching stuff that we wouldn't normally have caught.
that's good.
Is there still stuff to catch?
Yeah, yeah.
That's always going to be the case.
Yep. The criminals are not going to stop doing what they do. We'll just be a little bit more agile, haven't we?
Yes, and also things are changing at our borders.
Hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
it used to be, you could come and go freely, which you still can.
Hmm.
However, from what I understand now, there's going to be facial recognition at the borders,
Yeah.
which you see in any airport anyway.
Yeah.
It's just kind of a foreign thing to us. So
Yeah.
people getting off the ferry, they'll scan faces in the crowd, and
Yeah.
if we've got a baddie that's coming into the island, then they will be identified and, if not stopped, probably monitored as to, their activities here.
Yeah.
This is going to happen at the airport, which just makes sense. I mean,
Completely.
it's
Yeah.
a small jurisdiction and, one serious crime can affect a very wide community because we're
Okay.
85,000 people and,
Yeah.
you
Massively.
know,
Yeah.
the geography, if somebody sneezes or does something bad in Peel, by lunchtime, Douglas knows.
Yeah. Exactly that. Yeah. It is a very small community. Um. So you mentioned banks, uh,
Mhm.
and I'm thinking, and I could be wrong. The banks have got the resources and the infrastructure to deal with this, hopefully.
Yeah. For the most part, yes.
Yeah. Are the smaller businesses more at risk and are they likely to come under more scrutiny? And I'm thinking here accountants, CSPs, um, estate agents, all those sort of smaller companies, are they likely to come under the microscope?
I suspect they will be because
Mm,
there's a lot of money that moves through a lot of those
mm,
places, especially real estate.
yeah. Yeah.
Because you and I both know that real estate has increased significantly in value.
Yeah.
And so you get people coming in and, laundering money through purchases,
Yeah.
and they probably can't lose money because in another year it'll be worth more. So, I mean, that's one of the core principles of what a money launderer wants to do. They want to get the dirty money
Yeah.
into a clean environment so they can pull it out.
Yeah. So,
And as well, the insurance agents and insurance providers, it's new for them.
yeah.
Um, you know, they're going to have to also make sure that they've got a robust due diligence put
Yeah.
in place. And it's not just, know your customer. It's know who your customer is dealing with in a lot of places.
Yeah, understand the network. And I think that sometimes it is a case of people think in a sort of one-dimensional manner, don't they? That
Yeah.
I've done that. And we both know there's much more to it than that.
Well, and I think the whole thing of beneficial owners too. I mean, that's going to be
Yeah.
an interesting thing because sometimes that's really difficult to determine. And
Mm,
when you start looking at some of the companies that they're involved in other jurisdictions, then you really begin to wonder, what else they're into.
yeah,
And,
definitely.
the conventional screening tools don't necessarily pick up everything, nor are people really mandated to delve into things that perhaps, given time or given other resources,
Mm,
they can find an awful lot more.
yeah.
So it will be interesting to see, who they cite when they're here. I think they're here for 2 weeks.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I think there'll be many people a little bit more than a little bit nervous about it. So if you were a small business owner and didn't have the infrastructure, the sort of the budget, etc., to do this sort of thing, what can people in that position do to make themselves more secure, um, compliant, etc.? What would your advice be to them?
Well, I mean, it's difficult for small businesses
Mm,
because they don't have budget. As you say, they don't have infrastructure, and yet they have to protect themselves or they're going to be out of business
yeah.
because you and I well know in a small community or in a large community, you have one complaint that calls your reputation into
Mm,
disrepute, you're sort of out of business.
yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, for the small businesses, we don't have credit reporting agencies here. So they're kind of restricted to the information that they can get.
Yeah.
And any sort of online screening tools, AI use, there has to be a sort of a prescribed methodology for these small companies to actually do what they need to do to protect themselves.
Yeah.
I've always been a firm believer is, you know, set the bar, look for future proofing. If you think that down the road you're going to need to have X, Y, Z, and one, two, three, plan for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't just settle for what's acceptable,
Mm,
because what's acceptable now is probably not going to be acceptable
yeah.
2 years down the road, maybe 2 months down the road.
Yeah, because things can change very quickly. I mean, just as an example, I do know, and things may have changed, but things like electoral roll online databases were not always available. You had to go
Not always up to date.
right, yeah, or so you had to go to government offices and look in a paper directory if you were there,
Yeah.
but that isn't always the case if somebody's looking from outside the element. So that maybe that's it, but it's changed now. I mean, I use a database, and sometimes Isle of Man addresses appear, and sometimes they just don't.
No, and
So,
they're not always current because if people don't notify the government they've moved,
hmm,
there's no trigger in the land registry system
no,
to update an address if you are an owner. If you're a tenant,
yeah,
there's absolutely no trigger whatsoever for
yeah,
anybody to follow to update. So
yeah,
uh, I was just involved in an election in Ramsey, as you know,
yeah,
and people on the electoral rolls were not appearing because they hadn't updated their records when they moved from Douglas or someplace else.
yeah,
And also people's addresses on there, you would know some of the people and they don't live there anymore.
mm, yeah,
So they weren't
yeah,
going to get voter cards because it would go to the wrong address.
exactly.
I
But
actually had two people living here
yeah,
that they must be living somewhere in the loft because I've never seen them, but their address is still here.
yeah,
So I mean, things like that, that's a dangerous pitfall
very,
because if anybody can sort of update things, then you don't know what's going on with an address.
No, no, I suppose I'm thinking like a criminal, and I'm not one, but I've investigated many. So
Yeah.
if the way that criminals will operate, they'll find addresses, won't they? And they use them to have documents. So you could almost find an address on the Isle of Man that's not in the database, and then use it, and then potentially get documentation sent there. And
Yeah, or the really clever criminals would actually lease a spot
yeah,
and put somebody sitting in it
yeah,
and funnel all sorts of things. Oh, I've got an address in the Isle of Man, use this one.
exactly. And then you appear to be, yeah, there's all sorts of things that could go on.
Yeah.
But,
I used to see that sometimes in Canada where you do a sweep of your portfolio and then you'd look at a particular postcode and
mm,
you'd know that, why are people living in a warehouse?
yeah,
Or, how come 16 people have a registered address on a one-bedroom flat?
yeah. And this is where analysis comes into play, at a high level, looking down on the data and thinking, okay, what is going on? But so, but do you think the risk is more Isle of Man, or is it people from outside the Isle of Man that will be using the Isle of Man as a financial centre?
I think it's sort of a combination of both.
Mm,
I think probably some of the people here look at what's happening from the outside coming in and maybe want to get involved
yeah,
if
yeah,
they think it's, quick money or, maybe somebody coerces them into doing something
yeah,
that they shouldn't be doing. We've had a number of people arrested lately, drugs coming into the country.
yeah,
And the last one was fairly large. It was somebody from across, but somebody here with them.
yeah. Yeah,
So
and crime gangs are not that far away across the water, are they? So, and they will reach in without a doubt and just coerce or whatever they need to do to get another market. Uh,
yeah, and the unfortunate thing too is when we prosecute and send people to our prison here, being
mm,
such a small community, it's really difficult for them to re-enter community
yeah,
and get a legitimate job
yeah,
because they're almost destined to fail
yeah,
because the social stigma is going to be lingering where they can't blend into a place like Manchester where you can kind of blend back into the community and nobody knows. I
yeah,
mean, here probably somebody knows what I had for breakfast last week sometimes.
yeah. You're almost setting them up to go straight back into doing the same thing over and over again. It's a sort
Yeah.
of like a revolving door of crime, they used to call it.
Yeah, and it's really kind of sad because I
Mm,
mean, people can make mistakes, they can be rehabilitated,
mm,
and it's all about fairness. And
yeah,
if they're repeat offenders or they're going to repeat, you
yeah,
deal with them in a different way. But
yeah,
yeah, the social stigma, it's just like a company's reputation. Once it's blemished, it's really tough to overcome sometimes.
yeah. And we speak about that regularly. You can't put a price on that, can you?
No, and I've worked in many corporations that you try and tell them we need to do this, and they'll go, why?
mm,
And you give them the whole list of the risk assessment that you've done and what the financial implications are. And then you say, but we need to bring in this particular piece of software, or we need to engage a third party to do some sweeps. And they look at the cost and they'll go, well, no.
mm,
It's really hard with some boards, particularly when finance is tight, money's tight,
yeah,
them to get through their heads and to actually quantify what reputational risk is.
exactly. Uh,
And it can make or break a company. It's just like what the island's going to go through with Moneyval. I mean, that's sort of a make it or break it as far as the economy goes.
yeah,
So, everything is being done. People are, dropping tools and making sure that we look very good with that. It's sort of a no expense spared because you can't really spare expense, but
yeah,
companies that sort of look at it was, okay, well, it's going to cost us this much. We don't have it in the budget. Well, look at it the other way. If you don't spend it, what's going to happen if there's a problem?
yeah,
And how can you do to mitigate that risk? You might not be able to afford state of the art,
mm,
but at least I think if you can demonstrate you've identified it,
yeah,
you're taking some proactive measures,
yeah,
you understand in the marketplace there are other things that you possibly could get a better lift with, but it's not within your scope.
yeah.
At least you've started to sort of,
You've
you
gone
know,
through the process, yeah,
pave the pathway to
yeah,
improve.
exactly. Rather than doing nothing, or even the appearance of doing nothing because you haven't kept the records, and that. It's always been at the sort of heart, the beating heart of investigation engine, really. That's what it's all about. So ideal for small businesses as well. Um, but yeah, so there isn't a choice with this stuff, is there? Due diligence. It's
It really isn't.
yeah. And I saw a piece on the notices from the FSA. I'm not going to name it. If people want to find out, they can go and have a look. But small business, sole practitioner in the regulated sector
Yep.
hasn't done risk assessments, hasn't done due diligence, close to £3,000 in a fine. Now, I don't. The small businesses can't easily subsume that amount of money as a fine, can they? But
No.
it
And,
just
and
doesn't make any
and the
sense.
reputation alone,
Yeah,
it's worth a lot more than the £3,000.
yeah, exactly. And that you can't quantify the ongoing costs of that. So prevention is better than cure. But just doing something is better than doing absolutely
I
nothing.
used to say to boards, we've got a lot of insurance,
Yeah,
and this is a form of insurance. You just don't have the tag on it. This is insurance.
yeah,
So, you'd have insurance in case the building burned down,
yeah,
insurance in case we had a flood or a fire.
yeah,
You had insurance in case an employee or a customer fell down.
yeah,
This is insurance to make sure your building and your company is sustainable.
yeah. It is another form of insurance for sure.
Yeah,
But you can't make decisions if you haven't got the information.
no, absolutely true.
Uh,
Absolutely true.
or if you do, it's not going to be a decision. It's going to be a recipe for disaster
Well, and I think the other mentality is, oh, well, you were just small. Nobody's going to notice us.
until they
But
do.
it could be something random. It could be somebody that writes a complaint. It could be somebody that goes to the FSA. You
Disgruntled
know,
employee, anything like that. It's
yeah, could,
yeah,
could be somebody knocks on the wrong door and
mm,
finds out something funny is going on where you are.
yeah,
You
yeah.
just don't know, and you should just assume that, the worst can happen and
And
plan for the
yeah,
future.
and there have been examples where those processes haven't been followed. There hasn't been anything bad anyway, but they've still been fined because
Yep,
they weren't complying with the regulations. So
exactly.
it never makes any sense to me why people just don't do the basics. So your advice to anybody going expecting, or perhaps on the island, even if they don't know yet, they may be inspected or subject order, would be what?
Well, just due diligence. Knowing your customer, I think, is the big one because,
Mm,
of course, if you know your customer and you have all the details that you can make a rational decision that this is a bona fide customer, somebody that you should be dealing with, then, the threat level of them being into something dodgy
mm,
goes way, way down.
yeah,
You can't know small companies that don't have the ability to do intensive screening, can't always know the full story.
no,
But I think if you've done a concerted effort, done your best,
yeah,
then you may get slapped around if the customer is dodgy. But if you can demonstrate you've at least tried your best,
exactly.
and I think you'll get supported. You may get fined,
Yeah,
but I think you'll be supported. You may not get a fine. You may get, this is your notice to clean this up type of thing,
yeah,
and they'll come back and make sure that it's being done.
yeah.
I I think we have to take a different view of the regulators.
Mm,
Everybody seems to think that the regulators are bad and bad for business. They're actually sort of the glue that ties everything together and
yeah,
allows the companies to flourish and allows the island to flourish because without that it would be just Wild West.
absolutely. Yeah,
Wouldn't be good.
yeah. You have to have that form of intervention. Otherwise, nothing will ever work because sometimes people and organizations have to be forced to do certain things.
Yeah.
But no,
And when they're forced to do it, it's probably going to be a knee-jerk reaction.
mm,
So whatever pricing they're going to get, people are going to know they're in a difficult situation.
yeah,
So if they have to hire a consultant to come in and do some things, it's going to be at a much more unattractive price.
yeah,
Uh,
absolutely. Yeah,
It's, yeah, it's just, yeah, think ahead.
yeah, definitely. Think ahead.
Think ahead and be smart.
Be smart. Yeah, I like that. Okay.
Ask questions.
Yeah, fantastic. So on that note, Thank you for participating in the Ice Bath podcast. It will be up in the
It
July.
was very cool.
Yeah, very cool. I like
I
that.
was going to wear my toque, but I thought no.